Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am pleased to welcome you to a two-week series titled Celebrating Successful Women in Government and Education. On today's program, we have three very distinguished guests, and again next week we'll have three other very distinguished guests, and all of these people are very successful here, and we're proud to say in Idaho. I first of all welcome to the program Dr. Priscilla Bell. She is the president of North Idaho College, and prior to being president of this institution, she served as president of a number of other colleges. And Dr. Bell, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Tony.
And I'm also equally pleased to welcome to our program Gretchen Heller. She is the mayor of Sandpoint, Idaho, and recently was elected with 60% of the vote, and congratulations. And,
thank you.
And Mayor Heller and I go back for 25 years, and we've
At
had
least.
many, many times together, and we welcome you to the program. Glad
Thank
you're
you.
here. And I'm also very pleased and equally welcoming to our program my good friend Michelle Fink, who has just stepped down as president of the Human Rights Education Institute, and she is still on that board, and she's also on the board of the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations, and she is in charge of, manages, and vice president of the North Idaho Title Company. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tony.
And I'm very pleased to have my very good friend, Dr. Bob Bennett, who is the former president of North Idaho College, and I'm happy to say is the executive director of the Human Rights Education Institute in Coeur d'Alene. And Bob, you have the first series of questions.
Oh, I get the first one?
Yes.
All right, this is going to be fun. First of all, I want to thank all three of you women for being a part of this panel. I'm looking forward to this because I think we're going to learn some new things. And so the first question, and I would really like to just address it to any of you, and hopefully maybe all three of you will comment. Why are so many women today being chosen for important leadership and management positions? And I think it is, when I say today, I'm talking in the last few years. You can comment as to whether you agree with me, but if you do, I'd like to hear your thoughts as to why you think this is happening.
Dr. Bell, why don't you go ahead and start?
I was going to defer to the mayor, but okay, Tony, I'll take a stab at it. In part, I disagree with you, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because women still have a minority of high leadership and managerial positions all across our economy in the United States. We've yet to break the barrier for President of the United States, our Vice President. We may see a change coming soon in that, but seriously, what, third or less of college presidents are women. You find even lower percentage of women in the top corporate positions. While the Washington State Legislature boasts over half of its population being women, you don't find that in many other states. So to a certain extent, I disagree with you. But if we compare today to decades before, certainly women have made strides. And I think that there are a number of reasons why that may have occurred. One, our times have changed. Technology has made it a little more comfortable, perhaps, for women to take on multiple roles. Two, women are entering higher education in far more numbers than ever before. The doors have been opened to higher education, and while not all jobs require a college degree or an at the university or associate level, many do, and that has opened more doors for women. And frankly, fewer men are going on to college than was the case previously in terms of percentages. And I think one of the many other factors at play here is that corporations and educational institutions, political institutions are trying to expand their talent pool. And people are recognizing that not all the brains reside in the heads of men. So
You've known that for a long time, haven't you?
Yes, several of us have picked up on that. So I think that's at play as well.
I think it's a very good answer, and I would agree with you. I would have not suggested that more women hold positions, but there's certainly more than did 30 years ago.
Let's let Mayor Heller know.
I think there's an interesting word you used. Why more women are being chosen? All right. I want to know who's doing the choosing. Okay. I think one of the main reasons, just like within the black community, is the fact that we have affirmative action, equal rights. Before, women were not given the opportunity to show that they had the talent. And You know, some people say, well, what's happened is that the white males have become enlightened. I say no. Legislation gave women the chance to show what they can do, and that's why it's so important, you know, to support that kind of stuff, because otherwise you just don't get a chance.
I think you're reinforcing her comment.
Michelle Fink.
Yeah, I was also going to mention the chosen part of your question. I don't know that we're being chosen. I think we're working very hard to get where we've gotten, whether it's through education or just longevity in your job or whatever. So it's interesting that in my business, which is title insurance, all three of the top title companies are all managed by women. And that's not to say anything against you guys that are managing the other title companies, but I don't know if it's our perception of the workplace or you know, what's making that happen, but I think there's obviously something going on there. So I agree with both the other.
I want to add
Please,
just one
please.
comment to the legislation part of it, because I think Gretchen has brought up something very important. And I think Title IX has played a big role in the evolution of women's own ambitions, so that we're seeing that, you know, there can be a level playing field or close to one in athletics. There can also be one in other arenas, and Title IX, which did not happen during my growing up time, has given women the chance to compete, to learn how to play, you know, teams, to do a lot of the things that are necessary, problem solve, etc., to succeed in today's world. So I think the legislation is critical too. Yeah.
My question is in another area, but I do want to just add one footnote beforehand. I don't think that that you were chosen. I think you worked your way to where you are.
That was great politics.
That was well. It's true. Your abilities got you where you are. Whether you're men or women, it's abilities and dedication and tenacity and intelligence and all of that. But I think one thing for both women and men that is really important in a successful development of a career is having mentors. And I want to do it reverse so that you don't answer last always, Michelle. So if each of you would be so kind as to tell us that people in your life that's really inspired you to get where you are, and although you know, your own drive, but you had mentors, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I did. I mean, I had a very solid upbringing, very blue collar. A lot of us my parents didn't go to college. I have very little, and I applaud those of you that have moved on to higher education. In my business, the biggest mentor I had was another woman, title manager, was Kathy Kendrick. She now owns Oak Realty, and she ran her office as your friend, but your boss. You respected her, but you also liked her. She gave, and you know, we gave back. And the other mentors I have are kind of maybe everybody's. Some of the leaders, you know, Dr. King. People that strive, not only my business, but in my personal life, just striving to make everything a little better, compassionate.
You would, all young people, would you advise them to try to seek out a mentor, especially in their early years of, like, say, college? And
I would, but I would also strive to impress that some of the mentors that we think we have, whether it's a celebrity or a sports figure, that you're very careful and choose them for the right reasons, because as we know, they're not always maybe what you think they are. So I think look a little closer to home, look maybe for a teacher, counselor, someone that is a little more worthy of your respect than just fame and fortune.
Mayor Heller?
I guess my mentor was my mother's mother, who was a classics professor at the University of Detroit. But I would have taken a little different tact. I think in some ways you have negative mentors. One of the jobs that I had was at the Denver Research Institute, University of Denver, and my boss called me and he said, we'd like you to go back to Washington, and at that time it was a DHEW, you know, to do some testifying. And I said, fine, great. And he said, well, I'll let you go home and ask your husband if it's okay.
Oh,
you know? And I'm sitting there going, this doesn't seem right. So I said, basically, he doesn't ask me. If he can go on a trip, I don't ask him. And then, even worse, I had been working there. I had had a professional job at University of Hawaii, University of Denver for 5 or 6 years. Had a lot of education, was earning a fair salary, as much as educators can earn a fair salary. And my ex-husband had come out of the Marine Corps and had 2 years of business experience, also very well educated. We went in to get a mortgage for a house, and we sat down, and the mortgage lender says, well, how much do you earn and how much do you earn? And I told him, and he said, well, we can't count your income because you're a woman, you're of childbearing age, right? And I just kind of sat there stunned. And after that happens to you several times, it's kind of these negative situations that say, hey, wait a minute, I don't have to deal with this. Yeah. So there are positive and negative mentors, and maybe it's just my personality, but sometimes the negative mentors have been the ones that have lit the flame under me.
Great. Dr. Bell.
That same mortgage situation happened to me, by the way, Gretchen, except that I was single and making good money, and I could not get a mortgage without my father co-signing the loan. Yeah. It was very disturbing and humiliating to a certain degree, and certainly was a spur. I've had several mentors in my life, male and female. One very important role model to me was, like Gretchen, my grandmother, who was a single mom after World War I, and whose education gave her a teaching job and later a university job so she could raise her 3 kids alone. But another very important person to me was a woman named Carolyn Desjardins, who is from this area. She's from this area, and Carolyn, along with Mildred Bullpit, began an organization called Leaders for the 80s. Says, you know, how long ago that was. The first class was 1981. I went in 1982. It's now called the National Institute for Leadership Development. Carolyn's gravestone is here in the cemetery at Forest Grove. I forget the exact name. And I was so moved when I saw her gravestone as I was walking through the cemetery one day. She was very, very important to me because she opened up doors through that leadership development program that would not have been opened otherwise.
That's very powerful. All 3 statements that you've made. I'll just give one that Dr. Bell in particular would appreciate. 35 years ago, I've been here 38, and 35 years ago, one of my friends came here and was interviewed, and the interview committee asked her 2 things: will you live in Coeur d'Alene, and will you get married? And she said she almost refused the job at the time. Bob Benicio, the next question.
I think Tony probably had Carolyn here as part of a workshop in terms of a women's conference several years ago, if I remember correctly. I was very impressed. I just finished a book called Why Women Should Rule the World. Dee Myers wrote it. And there are quite a few chapters dealing with the fact that we really are different kinds of people, men and women. We have a lot of the same things, but there are some differences. One of the pieces she speaks to is that women, she believes, resolve differences and achieves goals differently than men do. I'd like for any of you to comment on that as to whether or not you agree with it or whether you think there's something to her research.
You hate to do anecdotal type examples, but if you knew my mother,
Who I did.
you would say that she was not someone who avoided conflict, nor was she a compromiser. And if you knew my current city council, I think you would also agree. So I'm not so sure that I agree with this idea that when it comes to tasks, that there's a difference. I think if you take a look at how women are socialized, I think that might be a difference. But I think that if we take a look at genetic differences and try to explain the differences between success or failure of people of either gender, I think you'll find it more in terms of socialization and also in terms of structural inequities.
She speaks to both of those arguments in the book.
You know, Bob, it's hard for me to speak in generalities about this. I always resist stereotyping, no matter what group it is. I know I can speak for how I go about resolving differences and how and making decisions, and how that compares and contrasts with some of the men that I have worked with. And if I do that, then generally speaking, I would say I've worked a little harder to get input from people than they did, wide input. But as Tony knows, I make it very clear when it's my decision to make. If I'm getting input, I'm getting input. I'm getting suggestions, I'm getting advice, but I will make the final decision. Or if it's a case where the decision can rest elsewhere, then I turn that decision over. That's just my style, as getting input from the people that are affected by decisions, bringing people together who are having conflict and trying to help facilitate a resolution to the conflict. And sometimes I've seen some of my bosses, men bosses in older days, be much more directive and kind of shoot and take no prisoners kind of approach. But I don't want to say that that characterizes men
That's a
in
gender
general,
thing,
or that my approach characterizes women in general, because I don't really think it does.
Michelle?
Yeah, I agree with both the other panelists. I think that men and women do resolve things differently, but I also think other women resolve things differently. I think it's a lot to do with the way you were brought up, your personalities, and personally, I try to either make everybody happy or kind of come in through the back door and get them to do what I want them to do without maybe letting them know that's what's happening. But then again, it depends on who you're working with. And like Dr. Bell said, if it's a decision that I need to make, then I need to make it. And if it's something I can get some input on or let them do, then I try to delegate. But
I think there's also something too. I mean, lots of times bosses, though, I mean, the worst kind of boss is an intimidating boss. All right, I'm 5'1¼ all right,
I'm with you,
I
Helen.
can't be really physically intimidating.
Yeah.
So therefore, I've developed a way of handling problems, solving problems that works for me. So maybe you ought to ask, do short people handle conflicts differently than tall people?
And you probably would find some.
You would find some
evidence to suggest that that's true.
regardless
yeah.
of the Napoleon
Yeah.
complex. Right?
But in fairness, the whole idea is that men are generally larger than women, and women for years and years and years have learned to work that arriving at a decision differently, because it can't be a matter I've got more muscle than you.
That's right. So you come up with a thing that works.
right.
So maybe
And
there's
that's
something to it.
But that's, it's also socially, it's changed a little bit, because it used to be physical intimidation that worked. I don't think it works as well now.
We're not so intimidated.
No, we're not intimidated.
I think I understand that.
You've noticed that about
I have to preface my question with an example. I guess it was called a privilege to debate at Gonzaga University's law school a national author who wrote a book, The End of Racism. And I was respectfully disagreeing. He said that everyone should give up their culture if they're from a minority community, the African American community, Hispanic, etc., and they should accept the dominant white culture, and that's why you end racism. And I was very much opposed to that position. And there was a lady in the audience. She was a second-year law student, and she was African American, and I said to her, and this will bring my question about, don't ever give up who you are, not only gender, but your culture. And when you come to the table at the law firm where you'll be, it'll be more enriched. And so my question is, whether it be gender, or race, or religion, whatever it may be, aren't we a better people, aren't we a better institution when we bring to the table all this diversity?
Couldn't agree more. I think
Absolutely.
diversity of culture, diversity of ideas, diversity of worldview, diversity of approaches, I think are all very important. You said this morning, Tony, that one of the characteristics necessary for effective leadership is self-confidence. And I think that's true, and one does need to be very confident, but with the recognition that there are other ideas there, that there are people who are different and who approach the world differently and have a different frame of reference to bring to the problem-solving situation. And so one has to be self-confident enough to be able to open one's mind and accept other input.
Your point is so excellent, and I get the others, but as a student of presidents of the United States, the president's been most successful those that had enough confidence that they didn't feel threatened by bringing people into their cabinet that were as intelligent or more intelligent than they.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Fear leads to bad decisions. I think we've seen that just recently, and in order not to be fearful, you have to have confidence that you can handle the situation. You may not win, but it's not going to defeat you, and you're going to try your best, and you're going to learn from what worked and didn't work. And that's, to me, self-confidence, as opposed to saying, I know the answer. Got to be flexible, too.
Michelle?
Yeah, I think the more you know, whether it be about the world, about your local environment, about whatever it is, it gives you just a broader aspect of the world in general and helps you make either better decisions or I kind of have this thing now where I just want to know everything, a little bit about everything, but don't want to be arrogant about it, but just for my own knowledge. And I think that just helps you be a better rounded person for whatever you're dealing with.
I want to put in a footnote here. Michelle is very involved in our human rights work, and she went, I guess it was an airport, and she found a book last year and brought an incredible speaker to our banquet and had 500 people. And that, again, you have that curiosity, and I've got you reading another book that someone we're going to bring to campus too. So,
Yes, you do, Tony.
yes, Bob Bennett.
Oh, I recognize that you're working very hard in your statements to explain that, you know, there's more to this business than just men and women. But the three of you are women. And I read Margaret Thatcher was making some comments that a woman by herself in a room with a group of men finds it difficult sometimes simply because she's one woman against the group. But her observation was that if you bring more women to the table, the whole dynamics changes with respect to what those women will do and say. Would you speak to that, please?
When I was in upstate New York and attended the monthly gathering of community college presidents, there were some 34, 32 of them, I was the only woman in the group. I was also in a group of almost 100% white men, which, you know, coming from Seattle area was a shock to me by itself. There was one Hispanic gentleman in the crowd, but no other women. And while there was one other woman in the New York system, she was from the North Country, and so she didn't make a trip down to Albany for these meetings, I can tell you. And it was very different than my experiences in Washington, where the gender and the ethnic diversity is so rich. That experience taught me that yes, it can be an uncomfortable situation, and that despite my knowledge, despite my experience, despite my judgment, whatever you want to say, I was not initially regarded as well qualified to sit at the table and participate in the discussions as were the rest of the men. It was a very disconcerting experience for me. After about a year, the system began hiring more women. There were soon 9 of us, and then that number dropped significantly. But it did change the dynamics of the group. It changed the tone of the discussion, and I thought a more positive way, because it became a discussion that valued input from all of the individuals,
Regardless of sex.
regardless. And that was a welcome change for me.
Mary Helen.
Well, you know, I think you're right. I think dynamics do change. It's just kind of, for example, if you, Bob, would find yourself in a room full of 50 women,
Absolutely.
all right, it's unfortunate that you would feel that that was notable, but that's what society is.
Of course.
A black man, you know, moving into the higher echelons of the business world 20 years ago must have felt much different than he would now, because there are now more black faces. And I think it's true, but I think it shows how far we have to go, because it shouldn't make any difference. It should be whether you have something to bring to the conversation. And that's why it's so important for things like the Human Rights Education Project and our local human rights task forces, because we have a long ways to go.
And Gretchen is one of the founders of the Bonner County Task Force, Human Rights Task Force. She's been
Been
very
with a long
involved.
time.
Michelle?
Yeah, it's like you have to work just a little bit harder to be recognized, like you said, that you were qualified to be there. I belong to a state association, and I was the president a couple years ago, and when I first got there, men kind of automatically, if they walk into a room full of women, they automatically think that they're, still kind of
You take the
confident.
Confident.
Yeah, they're confident. I don't, they're confident. But with myself, and most of the time, it is majority men, and there's was 2 women. I think there's 3 now, but there's still like a table full of men. So you just have to do what you need to do. Don't think about it in the way that you're men and women, but just if you've got a point of view or you've got a comment to make, even if you are intimidated, you can't let them see that you're intimidated, and then you go home and go, whew. But
That's great.
especially when you're short.
I know Michelle and Gretchen so well, and you're wonderful, and you're not intimidated, at least not when I'm around. You've done incredible things. We're just almost out of time, maybe just 20 or 30 seconds each. How did you get into what you're doing now, or why did you choose that particular occupation? We'll start with Michelle.
Well, in this place, I will say it chose me. About 23, 24 years ago, I needed a job, and I didn't know what a title company was. So I took the job, and I just worked my way up from the delivery person to being the manager, and it's been a great occupation. And thank God I didn't need an education in my field, but I do think that's great.
Dr. Bell.
Well, I've been a passionate advocate for community colleges since I was 16 and first learned that community colleges are the institution of hope and opportunity and choice. Democracy's colleges. And when I first learned about them when I was 16, I said, this is what I want to do.
Mayor Heller.
I've always been active behind the scenes politically. And when the mayor's race came up, I thought, I don't know how many people I talked to begging them to run for mayor. Because I'm a gardener and an artist, I was having a great life. I couldn't find anybody to step forward, and I finally figured, here I am encouraging all these people to do something, and I wouldn't do it myself.
Now, in your case, you were chosen by the voters. With 60% of them saying, this is our choice. Well, thank you. On that note, we must bring the program to conclusion. Thank all 3 of you. It's been very stimulating, exciting to have you here. And ladies and gentlemen, we will continue our discussion next week with 3 new guests on celebrating successful women in government and education. We've immensely enjoyed bringing this program to you, and we hope you will join us again next week. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.